BSides DC would like to thank all of our sponsors, and a special thank you to all of our speakers, volunteers, and organizers for making 2018 a success.
Thank you for being here. My name is Pedro Fortuna. Actually, this is my third of 4 BSides talks this year, and it's my first time at BSides DC. I'm very excited. Thank you for being here. I'll give you a couple of seconds to read that. So we see this every day on the internet and social media. And most of the time, it gets our attention. For humans, we are drawn upon things that went very bad, horror stories. The shit hit the fan, and there's nothing that we can do about it. So if you think about it, it's a bit like when you see IT security-related news, right? And that's precisely the first part of our talk today. So we're looking into client-side integrity, horror stories. Then we'll see a couple of recent attacks of malicious injections on the client side. Then we'll move to the main theme of this talk, which is application real-time monitoring, a new approach that we have been working on in the last few years. And then I'll do a live demo and conclusions. Now, at the end, I will tell you whether or not I caught my web app cheating. This is our talk cliffhanger. A little bit about me. So I'm a co-founder and CTO at Jscrambler. I mostly work with client-side application security and mostly focused in JavaScript code protection. But before, I've worked a lot with bot detection, behavior analysis on the browser side, and anything that's related to manning the browser or malicious extensions basically gets my attention. In late 2014, jQuery CDN was breached, and for a number of hours, any website that was loading jQuery directly from their CDN was basically serving an exploit, the re-exploit kit to every user that was visiting those websites. So this meant a massive dissemination of malware to everyone, and probably a lot of people got compromised that day. So this only lasted a few hours, but it was probably the first incident I can remember that it was so bad. And back then I mentioned probably are going to see more and more of these attacks because they are far too appealing. In 2015, Dridex strain, a man-in-the-browser Trojan, managed to, or was targeting hundreds of different banking websites. And basically, the attackers managed to get out with $50 million US. And the worst thing is that it lasted 2 months before anyone took notice. So even though man-in-the-browser Trojans exist since 2007, 2008, in 2015, most of these banks are not ready yet. So they are not targeting this type of threat. Last year, we have a server breach to a dependency. And some companies like Equifax, TransUnion, they were serving, and I quote, a carousel of madness to all the users. So they were serving a survey to collect sensitive user data. They were serving a fake Flash plugin to everyone. And they were using that to basically infect the end user's device, and from there on, just collect sensitive data, credit card data, and so on. This year in February, a library, a JavaScript library called BrowseAloud, which is basically a library, as the name suggests, is used by websites to read out loud the text in the website. So it was compromised and more than 4,000 websites that were using this library at the time, they got infected with this extra code that was CoinHive's library. For those who are familiar, it's a cryptocurrency library that was using the end users' computers to mine Monero for the attackers. So one of the websites, so this got into the news, it was kind of controversial because one of the websites is UK's ICO, which is an institution that is meant to protect the individual's privacy. So, and they got their users to be crypto mining for the attackers. This year, I think in March, there was a man-in-the-browser attack. I think it was Zeus Panda strain, and it was, like always, targeting a lot of financial institutions. But what caught our attention is that it was targeting Coinbase and blockchain.info as well. So probably it wasn't the first time that man-in-the-browser Trojan is targeting a crypto exchange, but probably it was the first time that it really caught my attention, and we have been seeing this for a while. So it was discovered by a couple of researchers from Security Scorecard, a research company, and we got a hold of their contact, and we collaborated. And one of the outcomes of that collaboration was a talk that we did at Wall of Sheep at DEF CON this year, where we showed basically how the attack works and all the very little details. So a month ago, roughly, an extension, Mega NZ, it's quite popular. So the attackers managed to get developer credentials and to just commit a modified version of the extension. So if you know how it works, it's kind of automatically is rolled out to every user. So you don't have to explicitly approve the update of the extension. And it was basically collecting credentials from websites like Gmail or Yahoo, and also collecting private keys from crypto exchanges. So it only lasted a few hours, but this extension has 1.7 million users. So if you do the math, even if it only lasted for a few hours, it was enough to compromise a lot of users, and a lot of credentials got captured. And this keeps going on and on every day. More recently, in the last 3 or 4 weeks, we have seen a rise in the attacks against ticketing companies and e-commerce companies from a group called Mage Cards. So they basically, they infect, they breach servers, they modify code, and they were able to steal around 40,000 credit card information at Ticketmaster. And at British Airlines, it was even worse. They got away with 380,000 user details and credit card data. So we are certainly seeing an increase in this type of incidents. And we have been paying a lot of attention to all of this. So last year, we developed what we call the next generation man-in-the-browser Trojan, where we showed people that using an extension, any extension, and the normal capabilities that you get with an extension, you are able to fully capture any information from the user. You can take screenshots, you can exfiltrate all the information, so it's very easy. And there's a double standard in regards to browser code. Basically, all the code in the browser is thoroughly screened by a lot of researchers. It's considered to be quite secure, even though we discover a few vulnerabilities now and then. But if you think about it, the extensions aren't, most of the time, they are not screened at all. No one checks the code in these extensions. And the users just like almost blindly install these extensions and provide them a great power to capture user information. And what is worse is that extensions can remove security headers. So if you are relying in CSP or things that use security headers, extensions can remove them as well. So here you can see a summary of things that compromise client-side integrity. So first you have malicious or compromised third-party libraries. You can use vulnerability tracking to check whether or not you are using something that has known vulnerabilities. But as you know, that can fail. We are not sure we are catching everything. You can use sub-resource integrity, where you can add attributes to your script tags or to other tags that tell the browser to enforce a checksum before loading a certain resource. But keep in mind that many in the browser Trojans can remove this. They can basically alter anything, any part, even headers of the website before the browser gets to load them. You can use CSP, and you should. It's well developed and has evolved a lot. But keep in mind that both man in the browser and malicious extensions can remove them. Malicious browser extensions, you can and you should rely in browser store screening and blacklisting, but that doesn't work very well, and usually is reactive. So it gives usually some hours or days to the attackers to do what they are wanting to do. You can rely on the antivirus. But most of the time it fails to detect malicious code on the client side. And basically, you end up only relying in the end user not to basically do the wrong thing and install something that is malicious. But as we all know, most of the time that fails too, because users are not security savvy. And let's be honest, even security guys get infected once in a while. So it's hard. Unless you are checking all the code from every website that you're loading, you cannot be sure to be 100% that the website has not been tampered with and there's no malicious code running in there. So then you have the man in the browser, web injects. Well, there's really not a good solution yet for this. I always say that you better assume that some of your users will be compromised, will have their browsers compromised, and that the code that he is seeing might be tampered. Then you have things like server breaches or exploitation of common vulnerabilities like XSS, clickjacking. Well, you should do the whole array of things like vulnerability scanning, pen testing, run your bounty programs, roll out your security headers. And you should do all of that in a defense in-depth strategy. But that doesn't assure you that you are just filling all the holes in your web application. So what's the main takeaway here? First, we are relying too much on third parties. So we are relying on vulnerability tracking to do its job, to discover very fast whether or not the dependencies have problems. We are relying on third parties from which we load third-party JavaScript not to infect us. Obviously, they are not doing it on purpose, but they get breached as well. And most of the time, it's easier to breach a third party than to breach like a very large company with lots of InfoSec people working on it. We are trusting browser extension stores to filter out any malicious extension and to quickly catch those that are tampered maliciously. We are trusting antivirus to be efficient, but they are not. Even they say that they are only efficient 40% of the time, which is probably even lower. And we are trusting end users not to get infected. And as you know, that doesn't work. So all the solutions I've mentioned, they have limitations. I totally encourage you to use them, but they have their flaws and limitations. For instance, sub-resource integrity, as I mentioned before, can be removed. Security headers can be stripped. And any vulnerability assessment can let a few vulnerabilities slide through. So the last idea and is that this type of attacks, they are far too appealing. I mean, you can always, like, we always say that you shouldn't store things in the clear on the server side, like credit card data and all of that, of course. And even if you store sensitive data, you should use strong encryption and all of that. But you have to understand that some of these attacks, they don't even target the end website. They only target like third parties. So they don't have access to, even if they breach a server, it's not going to be the server of the end website. It's only like the middle third-party library. And even if they manage to get into the server of the end website, if they use strong encryption, they cannot have access to the information. But by tampering with the client side, they are seeing the information flowing as the user inserts that. So certainly it's not encrypted at that point, and they can exfiltrate that very easily because it's hard for the server-side guys to have a reach into the client side and just stop that from happening. So basically, a few years ago, like a couple or 3 years ago, we were thinking about this problem and thinking how to solve this. And basically, we just, for a while, we just quit. We just, injections will occur, tampering will occur. So how can we solve this problem? Maybe we can detect the problems and deal with that later. So when thinking about how can we detect this, we kind of were like bouncing off ideas, and first we thought, where should we detect the tamperings? Should we do it at the network level or at the DOM level? So at the network wouldn't work because some tamperings only are done later when the page is loading. So definitely we need to do it at the DOM level. Then we must do it in real time because after the injection occurs, maybe we have this short window of time where we can react to what is happening. Maybe if we trigger some reaction on our side, we can do something. It must be transparent, so it must not require an end-user installation of any plugin or any end-user software. And it must be scalable because we are talking about screening and monitoring the DOM of thousands of millions of sessions across many websites. And it must be precise. It must not be too noisy because if you have developed a web application recently, you know that once the page loads, there's lots of things happening on the client side. The DOM keeps shifting and shaping as things occur. So the new approach basically checks for DOM modifications as they occur. It checks for any tampering to event handlers code, like when you submit a form. It checks if the code running is the code that it's supposed to be there. And it protects native API functions from poisoning, like XML HTTP requests. And when things are detected, it sends out real-time alerts to a backend component, and from there to a webhook on the web application. I will explain in more detail in a second. And this allows the application to trigger automated reactions or preset policies. So this is the architecture. So on the client side, we have a real-time monitoring agent. This is plain JavaScript that you need to embed into the web application. And it keeps monitoring the DOM for the things that I've mentioned. And for that, it uses Mutation Observers. If you are not familiar, it's a browser API where you listen to modifications to the DOM, like new elements coming in, new elements being removed. We also use checksums for certain parts of the website that are not expected to change that often, like login forms. And we are using just plain old techniques for detecting poisoning of JavaScript native functions. So when things are detected, information gets sent out to a server component, real-time monitoring backend, where things are processed, and we basically need to know if it's a false positive, if it's normal, if it's not. We use machine learning. And then if we decide this is an alert, it gets sent to the back end of the application using a webhook. So based on that information flow, the application can decide if adjustments need to be done. For instance, should we kick the user out of the session? Should we present a message to the user saying that probably his device is infected? Or should we just send a notification to our fraud department for them to check this out? Anything is possible, and it's up to the web application to decide what to do in each situation. So it follows a whitelisting approach. So any previously unseen injection can be detected using this approach. It has different levels of sensitivity, meaning that if it's something very minor that happened, some UI modification, probably we're just going to dismiss that off. We are not doing anything about it. Use machine learning to distinguish between things that are normal and not normal, and things that are probably dangerous or not. And it also supports signatures. So this is totally optional, but we can add signatures for a better recognition of specific threats, like man in the browser injection. We want to know which man in the browser strain this is. This is just an example. The client-side countermeasures that we can do, we can do DOM healing. So if a certain block is injected, we can remove it, but it requires a signature for that. And we can also do things like redirect to a certain URL, delete cookies, or execute a custom JavaScript callback on the client side. So the real-time alerts, other examples that we could be talking about, actually I already mentioned those, so I'm skipping. So as a caveat, to be effective, the real-time embedded agent running on the browser side, it needs to be delivered with protection. Otherwise, it can be a target of the injections. It can be removed, can be modified. So in our case, we are using polymorphic JavaScript obfuscation, which means that we have the capability of every hour or even every request can have a completely different agent in the page, which means it will not be easy to tell which names we are using, how is it working, and to make it harder to automate something against the agent. It's tamper-resistant, meaning that if some poisoning is attempted, the code will react to that, will break the code, and has debugger detection. And to make it harder to tell what's the agent code, it can be mixed together with the code of the existing website. So using recompilation of the JavaScript. So now time for our demo. Sorry. And for the demo, I'm running a website, a dummy website from my own laptop. Okay, don't worry if you are not reading that, it's not important. Okay, and now let me load the website. So here, this is the virtual bank application, and things are already going wrong with this application. And to prove you that, let me load the same application in a blank profile. So if you compare both, you can see that the banner in the middle is not present on the right side version. So we're talking about two different profiles. The right one is not infected, the left one is infected. So what's going on here is this banner that's inviting the user to download a mobile application, which is fake. It has this Google Play buttons. We can click on those. And we are taken to a copycat of Google Play Store. But if you look closer, you can see that's actually play.google, not Google. All right. This is kind of stupid because actually it would be easy for the attacker just to get a certificate and and avoid the not secure alert here. So it could be even stealthier than this. And this version, contrary to the normal version, doesn't have an install button, but rather a download button. So if we are running this application from our mobile phone, and if we have installing from unknown sources, probably if you click that, you will get an APK. And if you click on that, you will install the malicious application on your device. And from this moment after, your mobile device is compromised. So this is the story. And now I'm basically redoing the same thing, but now enabling the application real-time monitoring. Because this is a demo, this is very simple. So it's just a script tag in the web page that I am uncommenting. So I'm going to enable the agent manually. So usually it's not installed like this. All right. So this is the dashboard. Usually this is only available to the owner of the web application, not to the end user, of course. And now I'm going to load the virtual bank application again. And please pay attention to the banner. So after a second, it's removed from the web page. And as you can see, in real time, we get an alert here. So if you look closer, it's a blacklisted fake mobile app banner signature that has been removed. So like I mentioned a while ago, we can only remove things that have been injected if we have a signature. So in this case, we did have a signature. That's why the description is so complete. Let's see what sort of information we can check. So we can check the client's IP. We can check the URL, the user agent. And this is the most interesting part, where you can see the actual markup that the user was seeing. So everything from this point to this point was the injection. So this whole div element was injected, and we can see all the dirty details. So we can see that there's a link to play.goggle. We have data URI. We can see everything, right? And now, usually, from a backend perspective, from the InfoSec team perspective, if you want, we cannot see anything. So you just assume that whatever leaves the server is what the user is seeing. But we know that that doesn't happen all the time. So how can we see what the user has saw? We depend upon the user to report this. And usually, it only happens like a month later when he checks the credit card balance. And maybe he will recall that something was off about his session in the online bank. But most of the time, it doesn't need to, there's no visual indicators that something is different about that website. We'll see the rest of the examples. So let's proceed. Just keep in mind that at this point, the application knows that this session is probably tainted or compromised. So the application could be already reacting and actually preventing me from logging into the application. That's not the case in this demo, but it would be possible and easy to do. So I'm just logging in. And even before I log in, I'm seeing new threats coming in. And this one is a little bit more generic. So this is well, you can call it a 0-day if you want. It's not actually a vulnerability. So I'm not totally, it's not really a 0-day in that sense. So in this case, it's code poisoning, on submit poisoning on the form instance. Let's check this out. And here you can see that the login form, in this case, the form wasn't modified, but the attacker modified the on submit code that gets executed when you click the login. So this is a very simple code. All it's doing is just exfiltrating the user's credentials after he logs in. So we are not doing anything at this moment. Let me just proceed, knowing that my credentials were captured. And now let me do a transaction. So here I have a few accounts. Okay, new things are happening. Here, another code poisoning. Actually, this is very similar to the previous one because the onSubmit function has been replaced. But in this case, it has more details. So you can see that the attacker is collecting the original name, the original destination bank account, that he's storing everything in session storage, probably because he needs to use this information later. And we'll see. And he's appending his own destination account, which is probably a mule. So the transaction will be actually done to his mule account, and then it's like regular online banking fraud. All right, so again, we are not doing anything at this moment. It's just to show you what happens in a normal attack that's successful. So here we can see that more things are happening. Inner text poisoning. If we go to the details, we can see that this is actually the destination bank account that the user intends to transfer to. So what's happening is that the mule account was sent to the bank, and the bank just serves a normal transaction validation page where you would see the mule account number. But to prevent the user from suspecting anything, the attacker is fetching what he stored in session storage and just poisoning the text elements in order for the user not to suspect. And this is it, basically. Okay, and this is the final summary, and again, the attacker needed to tamper with this. So as a summary, what sort of attack vectors, because you just saw one use case, what sort of attack vectors are we catching with this approach? We are catching man-in-the-browser injections, of course, malicious and compromised extensions, malicious and compromised third-party libs or CDNs, XSS, requests that are made out to third parties that weren't supposed to be made, like exfiltration of data, and user-based tampering. So if the user is just like poking around, just opening the debugger and changing things, we can detect that as well. So there's a footnote, provided that these injections manifest themselves in the DOM. So the DOM needs to be changed in any way. Native library needs to be modified or poisoned. Otherwise, if we don't see anything, we cannot catch this type of attacks. And what sorts of things are these attacks doing, really? So they are tricking the user into like doing something that's against his own interests, like requesting a two-factor authentication token. Actually, remember the Coinbase man-in-the-browser attack that I mentioned before? What they were doing is like serving a fake message to the user saying that, hey, we detected an unrecognized device using this session. So please, to confirm that everything is okay, just provide me a two-factor authentication token. So this two-factor authentication token was never requested from the website. And what the script does is uses that two-factor authentication token to downgrade the security settings in Coinbase's settings. So after doing that, they can initiate transactions from the user account without actually the need to give a two-factor authentication. So in summary, two-factor authentication doesn't protect you from this type of attacks. They are serving exploit kits. They are collecting and exfiltrating credentials, keys. They are doing form jacking, data exfiltration. They are doing customer journey hijacking, which is things like in e-commerce website, they might put an ad next to a product saying that, hey, you can get this product cheaper in a different website. Just click here. And that drives away the users. Supply chain attacks. This is what we call when a third-party library is compromised or a third-party server is breached and the code is modified. Usually it's easier because they have fewer InfoSec resources. They do less to protect themselves than actually the companies that use their library. They are injecting ads, injecting forms, and doing cryptojacking. And this is the cliffhanger. So if you are still interested, so did we really caught our web app cheating? And the answer is yes. So when we started using application real-time monitoring, we just used this on our own website, and we use Braintree to collect credit card payments. And back then, we were using their version 1 of their API. And because it was based in JSON-P, it was basically when someone purchased a plan in the website, it basically prints this script tag for a split second into the DOM. And for that split second, you can see all the credit card details. And this is available to us. That shouldn't be looking at this. That's why we use a third party to collect this kind of information. And it's also available to any third party that we are using in our own website. So if you use a third party, is a good rule of thumb is just put that third party in an iframe, in a sandbox iframe, if you can. You should do that. But still, this is bad. And this is something that we only caught by using application real-time monitoring. And of course, we detected many other things, but this is a very compelling example because you can see the credit card details of our clients. So in conclusion, the client side is the danger zone. It's too many ways that someone can tamper and modify the application. You should use defense in depth. Use all that you can, vulnerability tracking tools, SRI, CSP, etc., security headers. But header-based defenses are weak, are still weak. And if you look at everything that's being done in the W3C institution, we are mostly relying on security headers to enforce things in the browser. But unless we solve the malicious extensions or extensions that have too much power and they can tamper with the security headers, unless we have a good solution to solve the man in the browser, this is not going to hold. Application real-time monitoring just assumes that injections will occur and tries to do something with it. It tries to notify the application in real time. And even though it cannot stop the modification or the injection, it's the best next thing because you can kick the user out of the session and stop things before real problems occur, like transactions going out. But sometimes that may not be enough if sensitive user data is exfiltrated. But at least you know about it immediately, not 2 months later when it gets in the news, right? So it's also useful for security professionals because you can see what the user is seeing, you can investigate, you can see what sort of JavaScript was being run, you can see if they try to exfiltrate to a third-party server, you can try to follow the lead and see what you can do about it. And like everything in security, if you put enough barrier, probably the attackers, unless they are really motivated, unless their only target is you, probably they will just move to the next target because it's easier and attackers are usually lazy. And this is all I have for today, I think. Thank you. I think we have around 9 minutes for questions.
So is this all available through the Jscrambler solution?
Yeah, this is a commercial solution. My interest here was not to pitch it, but rather to talk about how it works and the benefits. Because if you want, you can roll out your own solution. Yeah. Sorry, maybe you can speak a bit louder.
You mentioned requiring signatures. Are those signatures for the malicious component or for the pristine untampering website?
No, the signatures are for the malicious things. So it does follow a whitelisting approach. So it detects any modification. So you're not required to have signatures. But if you have if you want to just add more detailed information on the threat, if it's a known threat, you can use signatures.